Good morning. You're listening to Brian Wilson, one of my favorite songwriters of all time. Probably my favorite, actually. And as we learned from Naaman, many times we have great talent, but we have something that can hold us back. Brian Wilson suffered from mental illness, but he was still great. We'll be reading 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 5 and 6, and 15 through 27. Remember from the last lesson, Naaman, a great commander from Aram, had just been healed from leprosy. And then it was actually Naaman's servants who helped him to humble out and do what Elisha prescribed, because Naaman had thought Elisha was going to do something spectacular or have a more fancy way to heal him rather than dip himself into the Jordan River 7 times. Well, Naaman ends up being very grateful for being healed, and we'll cover a little bit of that in the reading. And we learn that we also are prone to having different types of leprosies that we can get help with. If you missed that, please go ahead and listen to that on this YouTube channel. So let's read 2 Kings 5 and verse 5 and 6. Remember, the king of Aram said to Naaman, "By all means go." The king of Aram replied, "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." I just wanted to review this to point out that what Naaman brought with him was hundreds of pounds of silver, something like 650, I think, and something like 150 pounds of gold and 10 sets of clothing. He was ready to give up a very, very generous amount, and it was worth it to him. So let's move forward in verse 15. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." So he's ready to give this enormous gift to Elisha. The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. The prophet didn't want a gift for healing the person. He was ministering to him. He didn't want to be paid just to help a person out. This was something God did through Elisha. God needed to be glorified rather than Elisha become a rich man because of it. So in verse 17 we continue, "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, so your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord." See the gratitude Naaman has. He realizes, well, the prophet doesn't need wealth, but I'm going to begin to worship God from now on. Naaman becomes a worshiper of God, going back to a land of idol worshippers. Verse 18, "But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot and to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything's all right," Gehazi answered. "My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of the prophets just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "By all means, take 2 talents," said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them. And then he tied up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master, Elisha asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But he said to him, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever." Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. So let's review what we read. First, it might even seem Gehazi is being somewhat reasonable because in his mind he says to himself, "My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought." After all, Naaman offered him a lot, and Gehazi said, well, he offered it to him. Why couldn't he just accept it? And Gehazi went out and he only asked for a fraction of what Naaman brought. But we quickly see that the motives really aren't pure. He says to Naaman, "My master sent me." That was a lie. He did this on his own. So we quickly see the motives aren't pure at all. He's not being reasonable. He's being deceitful. He never tells Elisha either that he obtained the silver and the clothing. He does this all behind Elisha's back in secret. And even then, he has a chance to tell Elisha the truth when Elisha asks him, "Where have you been?" But he lies and said he didn't go anywhere. And finally, there's a consequence. He ends up with leprosy himself. I just want to take away some lessons that are helpful to us. First, if we think someone in our life who has some authority, it could be our employer, a leader, a parent, a supervisor, if they should reconsider our point of view, we could just be honest about it. Naaman tells the servants, "We won't accept this gift." And Gehazi doesn't like that answer. He could have just been honest and said, "I don't know if I feel good about that. Maybe we should reconsider and accept something from him." Now, maybe he wouldn't have liked that answer either, but he should have been honest about his feelings. When temptation comes our way, we need to open up about our feelings. And so I would ask you to consider step 1 to dealing with any temptation would be to pray. We don't feel good about an answer we receive, or we are in the midst of temptation of some sort. We should pray first before we act out. Now, Gehazi runs after Naaman. Well, he ran in the wrong direction. He should have run away from the temptation. Step 2, get out of the situation. If you're being tempted, you should be alarmed and run in the other direction. Get off that website. Get out of that conversation with that person that's unhealthy. Slow down in traffic and not get into that battle on the interstate. Uh, Gehazi wasn't happy with Elisha's answer when they were offered the gift. By definition, temptation isn't easy to overcome at all. So a healthy dose of honesty would be in order. At any point along the way, he could have opened up to one of his colleagues. Step 3, get help. Call a friend in the midst of temptation. This is a very effective way to get out of a bad situation. Sometimes an effective way also to head off temptation and sin is just to consider the consequences. Step 4. These 4 steps of getting out of temptation I read in a book. However, by Guy Hammond, entitled Tempt-Away, 60 Seconds to Overcome Any Temptation. This is something he's practiced for years. These 4 steps. First, you're right in the middle of being tempted. Step 1, pray. If after 15 seconds, even after prayer, you still feel tempted, take the next 15 seconds to get out of the situation. If you've removed yourself from the situation and you're still feeling tempted, step 3, get help from a friend. Text someone, 911, call someone on the phone, get a hold of someone. If you can't get a hold of them, get a hold of someone else. 15 seconds later, you didn't get a hold of someone. Step 4, consider the consequences. Think about in the past when you've sinned and the effect it had. No good came out of it. Think clearly. Remember a specific instance. And these 4 steps should be very effective at helping us deal with temptation. We can learn from Gehazi, who didn't take any of these steps, that it's well worth avoiding the consequences to take steps to get out of temptation. I hope this is a helpful lesson today, and I look forward to the next one, and have a great day.